Welcome back, Little Helpers, to Season 5 of A Little Help for Our Friends. We are excited to be back. I have started my internship, which is now actually further along than Kibby was when we first started this podcast. So that is how much time has flown by.
Whoa.
If you can believe it. I know. So, in looking at what episodes we should do this season, because we've done a lot, and most of the obvious ones are kind of ticked off now. So we are really trying, which is kind of exciting because we're trying to get more into the nuances now, I think, of some of the major topics. We look back at one of our all-time most popular episodes, which was about toxic family members. And so we wanted to do kind of a follow-up episode of that, not just how to deal in the day-to-day with our toxic family members, but do we take a break? Do we cut contact? Do we resume contact? So today we're going to be talking about this issue of estrangement. And Kibby is the expert of this hour, having just attended workshop. So I'm going to be deferring to your knowledge a lot, Kibby, and I'm excited for this. This is also a pretty personal topic, especially for Kibby. My family has some dynamics I'll talk about, but again, I think if any of you are dealing with this, you might relate a lot to Kibby's story. So Kibby, welcome back as well to A Little Help for Our Friends. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing okay. I got through a lot of my cancer treatment, and I am officially cancer-free.
Yay.
So, yay! So, yeah, that was a journey. That was really, sometimes it just feels like a blip in time. It's kind of like COVID where the world moved on, but I was stuck in a weird hole. But I'm officially cancer-free. I have a lot of treatment to do to prevent it from coming back, but I'm feeling better and better and closer to my, normal self, whatever that means. So I'm really, I don't know, it's making me really, really grateful. Like, I'm really grateful for all the support I've gotten. I'm grateful for the treatment, that I'm alive,
Mm-hmm.
just like really simple stuff. And I'm really fired up right now about what we're building with Cool Mind. We're building a community and a coaching app for loved ones of people with mental illness. So like really you guys. So I'm really excited about that because, it's one thing to do this podcast and kind of speak on these topics, but every time one of you reaches out to us and talks to us and says how this impacted you or made you think differently about your relationships, it's just like, so it's the best. It's like, it's everything. Yeah, it's like the best part. And it just makes me want to do that even more and really help people like on the ground when they're going through the difficulty. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Go to coolamind.com. You could reach out to me, Kibby at coolamind, KULAMIND.com to ask more. Especially in the show notes, I'll always put where you can learn more, where you could join the community, where you can get the app. And especially for our listeners, I will be doing one-on-one coaching for, dealing with a loved one with mental illness, and really big discounts for our listeners. So, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know about the discount for Little Helpers.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty steep discount too, especially for the first client. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I, thank God, am not currently in need of your services, but I have friends who, are dealing with like relationships where their boyfriend is really depressed, or with like their mom, or, the girlfriend is like narcissistic or, has BPD. And I'm like,
yeah,
I wish it were my expertise to help you,
yeah, yep.
With this person, but I do know someone for that.
Yeah.
So,
yep. How are you?
So,
how's internship? You've moved?
I moved. I'm living in the Upper West Side and then moving to Harlem. I'm working at the Bronx VA. The people there are really cool. So far, I feel way less anxiety at the VA than I did at Duke because someday we'll do a grad school episode maybe, and I'll talk
Reflect.
about the trauma that was my first 3 years at Duke. And certain issues that I encountered there. But it's just been a breath of fresh air to start fresh and be among New Yorkers. I was very concerned that New York was going to seduce me again, and so far I've been safe from that. I think I will probably want to return to North Carolina at the end of this year and start a family. I don't know how you do it raising a kid here, but it looks extremely stressful.
Wow. So being back, you're like, no, I don't want this. Or are there things that like appeal to you or makes you feel excited?
There are totally things that appeal to me, mostly the restaurants. But beyond, the restaurants and my ability to transport myself, I like being able to be at, go to any part of the city at any time, day. I can't drive, that's why I say that. But the city used to make me feel so alive, it gave me the exact things I was most looking for, and I just don't think I'm looking for those things anymore. And so I'm like, New York, I will forever love it. I will forever love it for being what it was to me. And I just think that I have different goals now, and having different goals means that certain aspects of the city, like the crowds, and people letting their dogs shit on the sidewalk and not picking it up, is like, those things are standing out a little bit more than they did previously. But
it's so funny how much things can change. Like, we just, we talk so much on this podcast about how do you know if this is the right person? What do you do in the future? How do you plan? And sometimes you just don't know. You can make educated guesses about yourself and what you care about, but sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen in the future. Where are you going to build a family? What's that going to be like? It's just nuts.
Yeah. I think in psychology and in social media, we do a lot of pathologizing. Like, I sabotage all of my relationships. I must be a narcissist, or I must have avoidant attachment style. It's like, maybe you just haven't developed yet fully.
Yeah.
You know, maybe just cook for a few more years and then see where you are. Because, Little Helpers, thanks for growing up with us. We've changed so much, and a lot of the things we saw is like core pathologies were just, I don't know, we just had some growing up to do. And I don't even mean like we just had to become the better people that you become when you grow up. Like, no, it's just your needs change, your goals change, and those can become more or less in harmony with your environment and with your circumstances. So, and I've started thinking about even personality disorders largely as just developmental disorders, like somebody's stuck in development. Yeah. Yeah. And to me, that feels like a more empathic way of thinking about people.
For sure. That's so crazy you just brought me back like 5 years when we started this, and how different we were. And we've each been through like an engagement, marriage, breakup, and divorce. Grad school. Divorce, just so loss and new loves, and having a kid and cancer. Our friendship, going through all this stuff too. Jeez. Yeah. It's been like this is one of the things that's like a constant in my life, which is crazy. If you think about it, like nothing else is a constant. It's like this. This is the thing that's, been the same for years. So
that's true.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Now I'm talking about cutting people off.
Well, Kibby, why don't you get us started with this?
Sure.
How would you introduce this topic?
So I didn't know that there was a name for it. I ever since we've done those episodes on dealing with toxic family members, or the breaking up, episodes, and dealing with narcissistic abuse, right? When you're in a really difficult relationship, how do you know when to stay in it and work on it versus break up? I think this is a particularly tricky with family members, because you could break up with friends, you could break up with partners, but you'll always be mother and daughter or father and son, right? You always have that familial connection, and cutting off contact, you have to do that actively, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know the word is estrangement. And I just happened to take these workshops by Dr. Joshua Coleman, who's in private practice, who's an expert in estrangement. And I really didn't think much of it. I thought, oh, cool. I'm learning more about family therapy. And then I felt like the entire workshop was speaking about my life. I was like, oh my God. I was like crying, watching a Zoom, like a webinar. And yeah, so it just really resonated with me. And I don't know what the different definitions are, but at least it's when family members don't speak anymore, right? Or they're out of contact, or they're, quote, icing each other out. And it's very commonly with an adult child and their parent.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly
Okay.
women, a lot of
women mostly cutting off. Okay.
No, I think it actually depends. I think there was some research showing that, especially with mental illness, there's a lot of issues with the mother, and with like gender and identity issues. There's a lot of estrangement from fathers.
Yeah.
You could probably, guess why.
This is an interesting topic from a therapist's perspective too. And I know that the workshop was talking about this, but I've certainly, and I know many therapists, well, all therapists really, have had, we're the tell me about your mother profession,
Yeah.
So like we've all had patients who tell us or describe horribly unhealthy dynamics with one or both parents. And I've had cases where the continued contact with that parent is clearly disrupting my patient's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And you're on your patient's side, like so strongly. And so part of you wants to just be like, stop talking to her, like, stop. And you also have to hold that you're not getting the mother's side or the father's side. And that there's also real damage by looking at the one person who has been attached to you for your entire life and saying that that person's not going to be in your life anymore. And so it's going to be tricky as a therapist as well.
Yeah, that was most of my questions in the workshops. Like, what do you do if you're a therapist or a loved one of someone and they're complaining about their parents, and you think, oh God, like they should just stop talking to that person.
Yeah.
And that actually, the workshop was talking about how estrangement is on the rise now, where it's more and more common that people cut off their parents. A lot of it because psychologists, their therapists will say, oh, wow, sounds like your mom's a narcissist. Maybe you should not talk to them ever again. And so, yeah, so like, therapists are part of the problem.
Seriously.
You get one side, right? And sometimes that's not always accurate. The way we would describe our parents or the people that we have conflict with, it's not always true. Like maybe that person, especially with the word narcissist, we like to call moms or parents narcissists. And really that tends to mean you experience them as self-absorbed and emotionally unavailable. Mm-hmm. There could be a lot of reasons for that, right? So it's tricky.
I think, so just to kind of position our biases here. So you are, and we'll go into this more, but you are taking some space from your mother. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you are the child in this dynamic. You have a great understanding of the child, and also the therapist. I have understanding as a therapist. My family situation is that, so my sister has been alienated from her children.
That's right. That's awful.
And so I have sympathy for the mother, and my sister is not estranging herself. I don't know if that can be used as a verb, but from my mother, but she is accusing my mother of a lot of these things that go along with estrangement. And so once again, I also have more sympathy for the mother. So,
right.
But then I have the role as a therapist, and usually that role is more of like, wanting space from the parent. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I've got. I
Pieces
feel like
of it.
we're both positioned in interesting ways to be having this discussion.
Yeah, no, I really like it, actually it being called attention to, because I think the distance in these difficult relationships is seems to be like part of these relationships, but there's actually names and reasons why. Like I when when there's a divorce, there seems to be, that's a one pathway to estrangement, and often that's through parent alienation, right? Like one parent pitting the kids against the other parent, or like separating them from the other
Mm-hmm.
one, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's there are pieces of mental illness on both sides, right? The parent could have mental illness that the child can feel like is too much to handle, or it's just unhealthy. But an interesting thing that the workshop talked about was that adult children with mental illness sometimes estrange themselves from their parents because maybe they struggled all their lives, and it gives them somewhere to put a cause and blame to
Yeah.
their mental illness, right? There's like, have a trauma narrative. It's the parent's fault, and it just like roots it to a person that you could separate from. Right.
Yes.
So
I'm
not
aware of that dynamic playing
not
out in my
not to
family.
say like parents don't contribute to mental illness. I mean, we know that a lot of it comes down to like the dynamic with the parents, but we do know that, back when Freud's day, it used to be all about the mom.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's like, okay, we understand that it's the mom, but it's also the dad. It's also the siblings. It's also where you grew up. It's also your culture. It's also your school, social media, the culture, right? There's just so many factors that go into your growth that the mom could be a big figure, but it's not probably the only thing to blame.
Yeah, I think an important thing to talk about in this episode is maybe this misunderstanding that people have that, like, the tell me about your mother kind of therapy is a way to blame somebody else for your problems. Like, oh, it was my mother's fault. Got it. That's why I am the way I am. And that is not the goal of therapy. It's to say, okay, what factors, was I raised in? Mother, no mother, all these factors you're talking about. How do my current behaviors make sense in light of my learning history?
Mm-hmm.
And then how can I learn new things and mm-hmm. accept things and understand things better, not blame or victimize. And I think sometimes people want to stop at that step.
Yeah. Yeah. The blaming and calling them a narcissist I know this personally. It feels so relieving because it's such a simple answer. Right?
Yeah.
You could distance yourself. You get power from it. You get power as a child who's felt powerless in many ways. And now you're like, oh, there's a name for this. And there's a way to push this away.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels good. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't actually fix everything. I was actually surprised to learn that estrangement is not just in situations where one party was abusive. That's what I kind of assume, but it's on the rise now because we have like more and more helicopter parenting, which is crazy. It's like we have such a need to involve yourself in all different aspects of our lives, raising our children, our career, and everything like that. And we have less help than ever before. So moms are really involved, not just moms, parents are really involved with their kids compared to the past few decades, which is good because, there's more quality time. But what that might mean is that parents now are really over involved in people's lives, in their kids' lives, and identify as a mom, right? And identify with that relationship. And the newer generation, like us, we're so in a culture of individualism that defining who we are is defined like in opposition, right? Like I am rebelling against my parents and I'm finding my own way. And it's like I have to shove someone away to become me. Mm-hmm. Whereas the parents, that our parents' generation grew up at a time when you had an obligation to your parents, right? Like you
Yeah.
actually, there was some expectation. You have to respect your elders, right? Like, so there's, there's like this cultural divide where we're like, no, I'm only going to relate to people who help me grow and support me and emotionally pay attention to me and support my mental health. Whereas our parents are like, well, I just put up with it because my mom was my mom and I didn't ask questions. So it's been interesting to think about that cultural
It's
shift.
interesting also to think about it in light of the research that helicopter parenting is really bad for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting to look at whether it's bad for kids in collective societies. I don't know. I mean, there might be some difference there, that maybe individuation is more important in individualistic countries. But this sense of protecting kids from the outside world, supervising them constantly, it's correlated and potentially causal of part of this mental health crisis. And so in a way, it is something to move away from. And it's not like it's with malintent. I mean, these parents are wanting to keep their kids safe and close, and that has been traditionally called good parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that means. I mean, it is important to individuate. It's important to get to know yourself, to test your footing in the world. And if you have somebody who's preventing you from doing that, then how will you develop? And as we just talked about, development is very important. But is cutting off the only solution? I'm wondering if a lot of this estrangement is coming from people not having the skills to intervene at a more moderate level or intermediate level. So that could be something interesting to talk about when we talk about interventions. But so it sounds like helicopter parenting is a cause. There are, it's just said, political differences that are also causing estrangement. Do they say this is literally like, my dad's a Trump supporter, therefore I cut off? I know we talked before this episode a little bit about queer kids not being accepted by their parents and therefore cutting them off, which seems like a different
apparently
thing.
Apparently the political differences or gender identity issues, that is a source of parents cutting off the kids, which is less common. By and large, it's the kids cutting off the parents. But yeah, who they chose to marry, right? Or if the adult child identifies with a different sexuality than, what the parents find is appropriate, or it was in their values or religion, then that could be a source of cutting off the adult child. But yeah, most of the time it's kids cutting off the parents. And for many of us, that's a sign of actually taking care of ourselves, right? There's actually more benefits to the children estranging their parents than for the parents. The parents are apparently only feel negative emotions: shame, guilt, anger, loneliness. But the adult children are like, no, this is what I need to do to protect my mental health.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine when parents are cutting off their children, it has more to do, like you were saying, with disapproval.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel I have to cut you off because you are living a life of sin that does not agree with my values.
Yeah.
Which is not the same thing. The other case I can see is cutting off a child who's like heavily addicted to drugs or something, who's causing absolute chaos, maybe to your other kids. And that would be an absolutely gut-wrenching decision. So yeah, it's hard to see positive benefits being conferred on the parents in these situations.
Yeah. For me, I've been thinking a lot about the image that I learned in family therapy recently, where families are like porcupines all trying to huddle together and in the cold. And in order to stay warm, they have to get close to each other. But as soon as they get too close, they start to prick each other with their quills. So they have to back out and give each other space. And apparently the family system is really a negotiation of that distance. are we too close? Are we too far? How are we individuating from each other, giving each other space, but also depending on each other? And
Yeah. It's weird. I do that every Christmas.
Do you? Also.
I mean, every Christmas, it's like, I'm so excited to go home,
Mm-hmm.
and I get there, and there's a great homecoming, you know, and then all the kids come in, and we just start pricking each other in some way or another.
How do you guys like negotiate space? How do you do that? Oh, okay, so your sister doing.
I mean,
you were like, and we all, but one
well,
person.
my brothers might have an antler contest in there, you know, and then like maybe some dynamics will come around about
An
me being-
antler contest?
Yeah. Yeah, like some people might say a pissing contest.
Oh.
You know, like two bucks with their antlers.
Ah.
They're having to prove their dominance.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what my mom always called it when they would go at an antler contest. You know, and then it's just like how my sister's an addict, you know, and so it's like, how involved are we going to be in this? Oh, she drank, insulted me, freaked out my parents. Now, how is the family system going to reorganize? What are we going to do about alcohol? Oh, traditionally that's the way we actually get along. Oops, don't have that anymore. Okay, now I got to figure something else out. Now there are a bunch of kids, like grandkids, you know, like who, if does the grandparent have any parenting say, or is it only the direct parents? How do you negotiate that power struggle? I mean, it's just all sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's so common. And apparently with siblings, it's interesting. A pathway to estrangement is like if there's like a difference in, do we think that the parents treated them differently, or if there's one kid who's like quote quote the black sheep, that one typically will kind of remove themselves from the family or like lash out, and
yeah.
So there could be sibling estrangement, but you know, often that's like within that kind of web.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, my sister's 15 years older than me. She was the golden child growing up. She has an extremely successful career, and then she developed severe alcoholism, and I never felt like I could live up to her growing up. But interesting thing happens when there's a 15-year age gap. One is that as she was starting to pass her prime in age, I was starting to come into mine, and I think that introduces an interesting dynamic. When my parents were raising her, they had a lot less money than when they were raising me, and so she saw me as this spoiled brat who didn't deserve the things I got. And an interesting thing happens when the golden child has a big fall from grace, and I start ascending in certain ways. You know, like all of that has been a cause for complicated relations between us that I'm constantly navigating.
Do you decide to take space from her, or
I'll take space? I don't I'm pretty much against the idea of ever like cutting anybody off in my family myself, but I certainly am. You have to take space from addiction. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how anybody can stay up close and personal with it eternally.
yeah, and there might be less expectation that sisters speak on a regular basis, where it's so like you taking space might not seem different, but for me to not take space from one of my parents is, you know, a decision. Growing up with, especially when my mom was struggling with drinking a lot, I definitely had to take space a lot. Like there was really big chunks of time where I was living in my dad's house or living somewhere else, like in college, where I was not talking to her. And I did it because, I mean, it seems like I'm just being a bitch, and it seems like I'm just being, storming off. But it was nice to hear in this workshop that kids who do that, adult children who stop talking to their parents, are doing it because that's what they think they need to do to stay healthy. Right? It's often that they will try to say something to their parents in a reasonable way, like asking for boundaries, asking for space, telling them, hey, please don't call me all the time, or please don't get involved in my relationship with so-and-so, right? And then maybe the parents don't hear that, or or the anxiety about, taking space will creep up and they'll push harder. And then the kid will have to take space because it's like, my efforts haven't worked. And that's definitely the way I felt. I mean, at the time of drinking, it was like really a volatile period. So there was times where I was like actually scared, and I actually had reasons to, keep myself safe by staying away. But I think what it feels like then, and it still feels like now, is I try my very hardest to ask for things, like ask for requests of, respecting, let's say, my rules with my kid, right? Of feeding him certain things, or, keeping routine or whatever, or asking for boundaries for myself. And then I feel like she doesn't listen to them, or she like takes it in and then kind of does the opposite later.
Very intentionally, yeah.
Yeah. And I just, I get to a point where I feel hopeless. And I think maybe sometimes it feels worse now because I can't blame drinking because she's sober. Mm-hmm. I've spent my life dedicated to like learning about relationships and communication and dealing with a loved one, mental illness. So I'm trying to use my skills, and then they work sometimes and then they really don't work. Yeah. And then it blows up on my face. So I feel so helpless. And I'm like, there's no way I can ever have like a normal relationship with her, or like be able to navigate the space that I need in the context of relating to her. And kind of like that helicopter feeling and that feeling of guilt really rang true because I feel so responsible for her happiness a lot. Mm-hmm. Growing up, and now I feel like if I ask for space or sometimes don't text her right away or don't see her or give her what she wants, she's going to be upset in like a deeper existential way, right? Like, this is really going to hurt her. And so I feel so gripped by that, right? Like,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
You had a mother who was very dangerous and, can I say abusive?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
At times, yeah.
And when you grow up in that environment, you have to pay so much attention to her moods and her state of mind and how she's doing. And the only way to keep yourself safe is to be super attentive to that and to prioritize it above all else. So it's very difficult to go from that and putting your own hurt and pain on the back burner, because attending to that will just get you more hurt and pain, to then suddenly have to choose yourself and still have that automatic instinct to attend to her and her emotion and her pain, and then suddenly know that you're about to be the cause of it. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. What a terrifying thing to have to face, and a guilt-inducing thing to have to. And she intentionally made you feel guilt and shame for completely innocuous behavior that was interpreted a particular way.
Right. I will say that would be reading on my side, and I think I'm kind of torn about this, but she would call me abusive because I think that, and this is my perception, of course, you would have to get the other side, caveats, but I think that for someone like her, and maybe a lot of the moms that we're talking about, these helicopter moms, separation, boundaries, and individuation can feel so painful that it could feel like a rejection, or could feel like being hurt, right? Like a kid being like, no, I don't want to be around you, can feel abusive, right? Could feel like I'm being hurt right now. And so, but that leaves me spending years and years learning about psychology to be like, oh my gosh, when I ask for my needs and when I set boundaries or I say no or take time to myself, that's wrong. And someone's going to be mad at you for that.
Right.
And I live in fear of that. Like, I really, so from her side, she's like, well, I want the closeness. And it's interesting too, that the parents with the kind of the parents who tend to be estranged will have thoughts like, well, I did the best I could. you should have seen my childhood. I never got half of the things that I gave you. And so I gave you a better childhood that I could ever, like, how could you do this to me? Right. And it's important for estranged parents to remember that, like, just because you made their childhood better doesn't mean it negates things that hurt them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the child to be able to recognize, like, my parent is severely limited because hers were, or his were. And, you know, maybe this is what their best looks like. And that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you make a different decision about contact. But, and so I think that's kind of the mistake that the parent makes, is like, if you can just understand that the world I gave you is such a vast improvement upon the world I was given. And that's hard to do. Like, that is an accomplishment. Then you would forgive me and you wouldn't dare think of
yeah
of leaving me.
Sometimes it could be used in guilt trips, right? Like, it's like, oh, fine, I'm a terrible parent, or, you know, I did the best for you. I gave you this. I paid for this. I supported you in these ways. And for the parent, they feel like they're owed something. Right. But kids, or our generation and kids these days, you know, don't believe that there's something that we owe them. It's like, yeah, I owe you, you know, general respect if that's due, but it's almost like kind of dealing with closer to equals about, is this relationship good for me or not? That's what motivates me to being close to you or not.
Is there a multicultural aspect of this with you? Your mother's Chinese, a collectivist culture meets your American side?
Definitely. And it's really strange because I'm closer to my mom than she was with her mom physically. Like, we're in a different country and I lived like close to her. And my mom has also chosen sometimes to do in different ways, like take her distance. And that's really, quote, like, strange or wrong in Chinese culture. But there is this expectation of, you know, no matter what, you're going to be respectful, and you owe your parents a lot, right? You are obligated to make them happy. You're obligated to listen to them. And I grew up in New York City, in America, where it's like, no, if someone wronged me, I'm not gonna. I don't have any allegiance to that. I don't owe them anything.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, like, if I think about my kids someday owing me, like, well, they didn't get to pick being born. Like, I'm doing that for me. I'm not doing that for them. I'm not like, I'm going to have a baby so that baby can be brought into the world. And they'll be so grateful for that. You know, like, someday they'll love me. I mean, I sure as shit hope that when I'm old, they'll take care of me. But it's a different sort of attitude to think like, I raised you and therefore you now owe me, when it's kind of like, but you didn't have to have them in the first place. Yeah,
but even so, becoming a mom, I'm like, oh, whoops. Like, it is so much work to be a mom. And now it's actually like, I'm like, what are the benefits of being a mom? Because the identity and role often shouldn't necessarily be like this, is you sacrifice everything. You give so much. It's like a one-way street. You pour all of this time, energy, and resources into this child. The child grows up to seek happiness and might just cut you off one day.
Well, that's fucked. But I mean, if you're a shitty parent...
It's not always the case. There's not always a shitty parent. Sometimes they just want to, like, find their own identity. But, like, even... I was in this workshop. I'm, taking time from my mom. And even I, a couple minutes ago, wanted to hug and kiss my son. And he was just like, no. And I was like, why not? I get up every day early for you. You can't just give me a hug. So there is this sense of, like, being in this estrangement relationship. The kid definitely has more power because the mom or the dad feels the pain of the distance, feels like I put in so much in my life and I did my best. And then the kid doesn't even want anything to do with me, which causes only me pain and, like, benefits them somehow. So
But I think that's an interesting part of all of this, is that the kid is not traditionally the one in power. This is kind of the big power move. This is the trump card that they have in their deck. Mm-hmm. And so I think for some kids, you know, who grew up feeling powerless, this is actually the first and only way they know how to even get power.
Yeah. That's really the only way I could feel like right now in this moment. They're really the only way I could feel like I have the space to be myself and to like parent the way I want and to take care of myself and my health, right? Like there's sometimes so much about my relationship with my mom that's about doing things to keep her happy. She probably wouldn't agree. She does contribute a lot to my life. She really, you know, is a great grandmother, and that's often the case, a great grandmother to my son. But I feel like there's a lot of not being able to be myself around her, and kind of taking that she doesn't listen to what I want or doesn't listen to what I say. So it kind of feels like I'm not a human. It doesn't feel like I'm being a person to her. It kind of feels like I only tapped into this recently. Like I feel like I'm a supply for something. I fill the void, right? Like I fill her identity, her feeling connected that she didn't have with her mom and blah, blah, blah. And the weight of that is too much, because there were times when literally, like, I remember I would be in my room, I had the door closed, I'd be studying for a test, and that's when she would be the most angry. She would come in and just like yell and start to cause a fight then, because, you know, I don't know. She like...
Your focus was elsewhere?
My focus was elsewhere. And so it was just like, oh, I can't even just be by myself without having to like give part of me to making her happy. Or making not happy, because it's not like I'm a jester, but to make her feel like fulfilled or connected to something.
Uh-huh. I mean, I know something that people with BPD say, and I would think maybe even more so NPD. My friend with BPD said this to me recently, that she can't even feel her identity if she isn't, if there's not another person in the room. Like she can't tell what so she'll start texting me, like venting and just constant negative thoughts that are unhelpful, right? But she's like, it's a compulsion to text somebody when she's feeling, because she can't. It's like the boundaries of her identity aren't there unless she's in relationships. And it's interesting. It's an interesting phenomenon, because that is actually how we identify ourselves, is in relation to others. We're social creatures. And that process has been hugely disrupted in personality disorders. And so without others immediately there's no like consistency of the identity. It dissolves and then reconfigures itself, and then dissolves and reconfigures itself. So I wonder if your mother was like, if I don't have somebody like mirroring me back to myself, I lose it.
Yeah.
I'm just stuck in a cloud of chaos.
If she were listening to this, she'd probably be like, no. I mean, this is the core of the problem. But I think it feels a little bit less like she's a chameleon, and it feels kind of like me or Jackson's attention, my son, is the drug of choice. It's like, I need this. I need to feed on it. Yeah. I didn't get it growing up. Give it to me. And then what's hard is that all the fights and all the things has made me more guarded, right? Like with the porcupines of like, shuffled away. But that makes it worse, right? And so like I'm drawing away. I'm keeping up guards. I don't let her come and help with the cancer stuff as much as I did. And so she's feeling the withdrawal and the barbs of that. And then when I ask for, hey, can we postpone this plan for another time, it ended up in an explosion while I was like recovering from surgery. So I just, I don't know where I was going with that. I was getting kind of lost. And
well, I mean, you are treated as a tool and as a supply, as you said, of attention, rather than as being appreciated as a person that you are, pretty appreciated and respected and loved as Kibby, who
Yeah.
has needs and wants and interesting things about her and should be admired for a lot of other things other than what she can provide.
Yeah. And it's just, it still hooks on me that it's getting more and more common to be like, my dad's a narcissist, my mom's a narcissist, right? It's
Yeah.
just kind of like naming those things. And I definitely have thought those things to myself, you know that. And it's like, are they really? And, you know, when we're dealing with some mental illness, that might be true in some cases. But it might be culturally feeling that way because our parents' generation, it's like involvement means they care. So they're gonna jump right in and they're gonna be there and they're gonna call you all the time, even if you don't want, they want to know where you are and blah blah blah. And they're not as educated with the different empathy and perspective taking and like mutual communication language that all of us have,
Yeah.
you know, grown up with. So for example, like when my mom is, you know, very much in my life and tends to talk about herself a lot, especially when I'm going through a hard time and I find it really hard to bring the attention back to me, or like, you know, I just kind of feel like I'm an audience member, kind of like, you know, and yeah, I'm getting like mad thinking about it. But yeah, I just kind of feel like the tension's always like back to her and her feelings.
Yeah.
That's when I feel most insulted. I feel like you don't care about me. I'm just like an object. I have to run away to find myself again and to like be a person. But on the other side, it's like that my mom's generation, they didn't learn that. They didn't learn how to be like, learn how to be validating and really, you know, like ask people open-ended questions and be curious, right? Like
Yeah.
chatting on the phone at each other is like totally fine as long as you're connected. So yeah, that's the part that
I know.
really gets me.
It's just such a dialectic, you know, like I'm bouncing, I'm very biased towards your side with your mom, but you know, like my sister will call my mom a narcissist. I'm just kind of like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, she has some traits, I guess. But like parents, yeah, they're limited by their generation, what they were given. My mom's mother was a fucking nightmare. And so I do kind of think it's relevant where she came from and by contrast what she's given. And so that it's like that bothers me too. And like in your case or cases like it, I think what's so hard, you know, I think a best case scenario here is not usually estrangement, but some sort of boundaried relationship. And that can be difficult to accomplish sometimes because if we could be able to say, my mother is limited, there are some things she is incapable of. She will never take responsibility for X. She will never validate my feelings. She will never know how to communicate respectfully through a conflict, whatever the case may be, right? We could say, okay, when she communicates like this to me, I will know that this is a her thing, not a me thing. But it's very hard to do that with your mother. Your mother or father, we're talking so much about mothers because Kibby's mother, because it's the women in both of our families who are kind of in these dynamics, or the father. They shape how you understand yourself. And and they shape how you understand your own lovability. And so when they insult you or when they say something critical, it's just so much more difficult to separate yourself from it and to just see it as a string of phonemes or whatever that you can ignore. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If I had anyone else throw criticisms at me, it'd hurt, but I'd be like, ugh. But when my mom does it, it has its extra deep pain, right? When someone ignores my request for things, I'm annoyed. But when my mom does it, it really, really hurts because it makes me, it's like me as a person was just ignored, right? It has
Yeah.
such a identity and existential part to it. So, yeah, and it's, I don't know, it's so painful, and I just don't always know what the answer is. I feel like the workshop, I mean, this is kind of getting into tips about what do you do about it, right? And the intervention is everything that I would ever want. The intervention usually looks like in family therapy, is, you know, the parent who's estranged will ask for help from a therapist, and they want to reconcile. They want to get back in touch with their kid. In order for that to happen, they really have to take accountability, own up to what they've done to hurt the child, express empathy or interest in the kid's perspective, and, you know, just kind of like be open.
Mm-hmm.
And the mistakes that estranged people, not just parents, make is the cutoff felt so painful and shaming and guilt inducing that sometimes when they try to reconcile, but then they do it through, right, guilt tripping, right? Like, how could you do this to me? Don't you know that I've worked so hard to be, like, how could, you know,
Yeah.
they use guilt, or they use criticism, or they try to defend themselves or over explain. Like, yeah, I might have not been there for you, but it's because I had my own stuff going on and blah, blah, blah. Like, coming back and getting argumentative about the feelings that came up while being cut off as a parent is not going to work. You have to do the opposite of, you know, like, I recognize that there were things that I did to hurt you. I really want to talk to you about that and understand that better. And I, you know, I don't think I was a bad parent or I'm a bad person, but there are definitely things definitely mistakes I made.
Yeah.
Like that's like the first major step to reconciliation.
The thoughts floating around in my head. One is like, I bet there are so many parents who are incapable of that entire package.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought is, that is definitely what is needed, and I'd be so pissed if I were the parent and, like, I had to own up to a bunch of shit that I don't think is deserved.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I wondered that when I was thinking about that. I was like, why is it so hard for people to take accountability for their mistakes, right? We've talked about that with, like, in narcissism and other parts of our episodes, but it's really hard to take accountability for when someone's mad at you for something that you didn't intend to do, and, you know, that you didn't intend to hurt with them, right? It's like they're mad at you, and so you have to take accountability for being hurtful, but also be like, I didn't mean to, you know, like, what? I wasn't that bad of a person. That's just so hard to do. And I liked how Dr. Coleman phrased it, where he was like, yeah, there might be a difference between what you say to the kid that a person that you're trying to reconcile with, and the things that you think in your head. It's like, if you march in and blame all the people that you think is the reason why you lashed out or did this or whatever, then you're not going to get anywhere. But you could you could think whatever you want. You could think that you are completely blameless and you're the perfect parent and the kid's being little snot for running away. But if you want to reconcile, you have to genuinely go, yeah, these are things that really hurt you, and I'm sorry about that. And not the, well, I'm sorry this made you feel this way. Well, right. I'm sorry you felt hurt by the things I did, but I did my best, and I'm, you know, at least that counts for something, right? That's a recipe for, like, subtly blaming the other person for misperceiving their intentions. So don't do that.
I mean, I think it's like when you're resolving, well, maybe not any conflict, but you can't go into any kind of conflict situation and just say, sorry you were mad, or I didn't do anything wrong, or, okay, the only thing I did wrong, like, I only did that because so and so was happening. I would hope in these reconciliations that there is some room to hear context, though. And I think you can communicate context in a skillful way. So it might be, hey, I recognize that I made mistakes when I was raising you, and that here some of them are XYZ. And I'm sorry for the harm that did. I'm not trying to excuse it, but I do want you to understand that when that happened, let's say I'm my mother now. I was 25 when I had you. I was married to a borderline alcoholic. Actually, I would say borderline personality disorder alcoholic. And I was just a kid, and I was really working with limited resources. And all of that is to say that I didn't do these things because I didn't care about you. I did them because I didn't know how to do better. And I would like to now, or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a place for that. I think that would definitely be my instinct too. However, I think when you're intervening in an estrangement context, it almost seems like you want to, the power is still the kid. The kid can walk away, right?
I know.
You explaining, well, I hurt you because I was just 25, like the kid probably knows that, right? And it still hurts, right? So I think from what I understand, the first outreach, whether, in Dr. Coleman's practice is writing an amends letter, right? They write a letter that's just like owning up to the ways they hurt the child and opening the conversation for reconciliation. A very little explanation or like, here's my side, right? Like, because the point is to focus on communicating to that estranged person, like, I am here to listen. I'm ready to work on this with you. And then maybe later when there's more conversation, there could be discussion about like why I was a quote unquote shitty parent. But so it's just interesting to think about like when you have when there's contact cut off and the person who's cut off reaches out, the first interaction should be really more focused on just the apology and the owning up to things and not groveling, right? There's a fine balance, like, oh, I'm fine. I'm the worst parent and I'm just, just useless. That pulls for pulls for reassurance.
Exactly.
Which is like, genuine, like, yeah, I did those things. I made a mistake and I really hurt you. And I'm really eager to like work on this with you, right? Like,
I'm just ping-ponging back and forth between a scenario like yours, when I feel like an apology is really owed, and a scenario like my mom and sister, where I feel like my sister blaming my mom for everything is more about her excusing herself and gaining power. And so I'm like, I'm struggling because I'm at both poles.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I
like
mean,
if you're like if there was abuse or something, like, I mean, just delivering an apology with no excuses would be very powerful.
Yeah, and also you're talking about slightly different things where mine is the case where there's space being taken, right? Like there's people, separating, and what you're describing is a mother-daughter dynamic where one is blaming the other, right? Where like it sounds like they're locked into like a blaming dynamic versus like they're cutting off contact, right? Or
she'll repeatedly threaten to take space and do stuff like that. But
okay.
Yeah, and it's unclear like how long of space she's talking about, and I don't know. It's just so chronic that I guess I see in her the kind of archetypal situation of I'm going to cut off my parent or in some way, like, blame my parent for all of my problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that being kind of the parent as the victim situation versus I'm going to cut off my parent because they are actively harming my mental health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In which case the child is the victim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also seeing, like, her position with her kids situation where it's like that was a divorce and they were alienated from her because her ex-husband actively poisoned them against her. And she has responsibility in that as well. And so I'm just like, I've got these like 3 scenarios bouncing around in my head and 3 different points of blame.
Yeah, I mean, now that we're talking about this web of estrangement and alienation, and, you know, a lot of it feels kind of like power dynamics, right? It's like being close to you, and being close to you is really hard, like with the porcupines, because everything you say hurts. Every dismissal or whatever comment hurts to the core. And it hurts so much to be close to you that let's get power by drawing away, right?
Right.
And so, like, your sister has lost power because her kids are not talking to her, and she's gaining power by, like, blaming your mom for things, right? So it's just kind of like finding that, like, individuation, that perfect mid-ground of, like, the space, but also the closeness is tough. And yeah, I mean, I asked the Dr. Coleman, like, what do you do if you're the kid and really the adult child and considering estrangement? And I think, but all the things that he was saying, it's like, it sounds sometimes cutting a parent off is good for your mental health. Like, that's sometimes, especially in abusive dynamics, it makes sense to not. It might be so dangerous and might be so threatening for you to have your parent, you know, trigger these feelings all the time, that maybe makes sense. And it's even more complicated, like a situation like mine, when you start to marry and have kids, and then the grandparents want a relationship with the grandkids, but then that reopens up a lot more, right, for me, right? Then I'm way more vulnerable now. So it's like, yeah. But from the adult child perspective, I think one thing to think about, the tip is, think about what the impact of this will be. It's one thing if you're saying, I'm never going to speak to you again, and that's like a threat to punish that person. But if this is like, you're really considering this for your own good, right? For the long-term benefit and your well-being, then think about how this will affect the bigger picture. How would that separation affect your family? How will that affect your kids? You know, between siblings, are cousins not going to be able to hang out, right? Is it going to be awkward? You know, is it going to impact your kids to not have a relationship with their grandparents? Yeah, so I think just like thinking through what this means, and sometimes the best way is to say, hey, mom or dad, I think I'm gonna need to take some space for 2 months, like a really particular amount of time. I love you. You're not a bad person. I really just need this time for myself to get back to myself and find my own identity.
Yeah.
So I like the way that's phrased. I'm not as big of a person to say it. I think I would just, you know, send a barrage of texts saying what I really feel, and then like, fine, I've had enough. I can't do it anymore. You know, like you'll never see how much you hurt me. Stay away. Like, I did it the bad way, but yeah, if you are considering taking space and, you know, becoming estranged, then say it in a respectful way, say it up front, and do it for your own mental health, thinking about the long-term consequences.
Yeah. So I derailed us. We were talking about, okay, now reconciliation. So the parent should write an amends letter, just taking responsibility and acknowledging and validating the hurt.
Yeah.
What then? What happens then?
Yeah, and that's the first step, sending an amends letter. Kind of like the AA model of, you know, really just making amends and apologizing for how you hurt people. And then be open to the response. If they don't respond, follow up in like a
Okay.
month or two. And then, if possible, what Dr. Coleman was talking about is having, like a family therapist or the parents therapist reaching out on their behalf and be like, I just want to understand a little bit more about your side so I know how to like help your mom or dad to grow,
Mm-hmm.
right? No one can force people to reconcile. So if the child like really can't forgive, we keep talking about parent and child, but this could also be any family dynamic. But if the other person is just really unwilling to forgive, or they just get so dysregulated just in the presence of the other person, there's got to be more time.
Yeah.
It's going to take some time, and maybe the person who's estranged, like the parent, needs to do some work on their own. They need to learn how to express empathy, express care in a different way, work on the behaviors that really hurt the kid, and really do that work on their own, and
Mm-hmm.
then, you know, demonstrate that to the kid.
Yeah.
And it might take time to heal. Right?
I'm just envisioning so many situations where the parents can't do this, where they
Yeah.
just don't have it in them.
Yeah.
And I guess that would be a case for continued non-contact. I wonder, like, I had a patient who had way, in my opinion, too much contact with her parent, who had abused her whole life and caused a lot of trauma. But, she had this conflicting value. She's like, I understand that my mom was limited. I understand that the way she grew up was a particular way, and it's against my values to turn against her. And I imagine that's a huge values conflict for a lot of people in these situations. But what she and I had to work on was, how do we not be estranged but be very boundaried?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we stop expecting her parent to be the source of her self-love and validation, basically? And I think that is such a hard choice when you say, I either have to go no contact with my parent, or I have to completely change my expectations around what I can get from my parent.
Mm-hmm. That's it. When you said that just now, and also when you said it earlier in this conversation, I feel a pang of sadness when you say that, because
Yeah.
there is that part of me that wanted a certain parent that she wasn't. And to accept her limitations is to accept that she is that flawed of a person, which is like obvious, but it just makes me sad, because I'm like, oh, when I accept all of her flaws, I have to expect so little and just see her as not a potential like mother figure and see something else. Sometimes it feels like another child,
Yeah.
and that sucks. I think there's a part of me that always hopes that things will change, and if, to her credit, she quit alcohol, to grow. She grew a lot, right? Like the more than most people can. So even that gives me more hope that I could finally get what I needed. And no, I need to like accept that I might not ever get that. That's tough.
Yeah. And that's a horrible thing to accept. It's just the most raw deal, like who we get. I don't just mean you. I just mean like for some people who they get as parents, and who they don't get as parents, rather, I should say.
Yeah.
It is hard to watch other people walk around with this, unconditional love supplied to them by their parents, this secure attachment supplied to them, and have to accept, like, wow, I'm never going to have something that feels like such a fundamental human right, like a birthright, and the thing that we know is the biggest factor in future success in life. I mean, that's a horrible thing to accept, and I can understand why it would feel better to say, I'm going to go no contact so that I can push off accepting this. So I never have to accept it, maybe, but I don't have to be punished by it continually either.
Yeah. It feels like acceptance means giving up hope.
Mm-hmm.
That's rough.
Yeah, so I guess the only thing I'll say on that also is like sometimes it is not about can my parent change. Sometimes it's about what is my value around who I am in my family and about what I do. So, I mean, with my patient, she chose my mom's never going to change, but it's my value. What I value is forgiving and maintaining contact with the person who raised me. So as punishing as it is, I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to limit my expectations and I'm going to limit contact.
Yeah.
So that is a way to go.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And being really clear about what those limitations are, I think that you could run into the mistake of being like, okay, we'll just hang out a little bit, or I'll talk to her a little bit. Mm-hmm. And what that means is unclear. So if it's like once a week, we'll go to dinner or we'll have one phone call, whatever, like just keeping the boundaries consistent and very clear would be really good. Clear
with both people, clear with yourself and clear with your parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a boundary setting episode, so if anyone is curious, you can listen to that one. Forgot what season it is, but
agreed. Well, little helpers, if you don't want to be estranged from us, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Leave us a little comment, give us some love. We love reading them. Makes us feel good inside. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.